Mr. Speaker, sir, how on earth do you wish us to comment in 30 minutes on 70 important law changes into legislation? We'll see. I'll do my best. But I will follow, Mr. Speaker, the rules of debate as I understand it to be on a finance bill. That is, one should speak on the technical nature of the amendment, except, and that is a big exception, where the actual finance bill does not implement something or tries to implement something which has not been announced in the budget, or there have been changes in the finance bill as to what was originally proposed in the budget. That is how I understand rules of debate on a finance bill should be, but maybe, again, there is no new normal, I'm not sure. Now, Mr. Speaker, so far as the fiscal measures announced by government are concerned, there are 4 main fiscal measures announced by the Minister of Finance. One dealt with indirect taxation, that is sugar tax, doubling of taxes on sugar products. That has remained unchanged. And the second one, the second type of fiscal measure, was on direct taxation. 3 measures were announced by the Honourable Minister of Finance a few weeks ago on direct taxation. All 3, Mr. Speaker, sir, have been either dropped or severely modified in this finance bill. And that is, I think, Mr. Speaker, the first time in the history of Mauritius, since independence, that a Minister of Finance has had to revoir sa copy in the way that the present Minister of Finance has done. And I will, of course, Mr. Speaker, explain what I mean. As far as the measure of taxing large corporates who have a turnover of 500 million rupees or more, that tax was announced, a taxe sur le grand capital, and of course, there has been a lot of lobbying, there has been a lot of objection to this. And what has happened to this famous tax on large companies? It has just simply been abandoned, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with the abandonment. I think that taxes on turnover exist in Mauritius. They exist on banks, they exist on telephony companies. But this is not the moment where everybody is facing liquidation or receivership or bankruptcy, where people are thinking of making people redundant, that you would introduce a tax not on your profits, but on your turnover, irrespective of what your profits would be. It's unthinkable in this crisis situation that a Minister of Finance would even dream of introducing such a tax. And I congratulate the Minister of Finance for abandoning his own measure. It would have been, Mr. Speaker, unthinkable, as I say, to have done so. And this is why I said this is a budget d'apprenti sorcier. As if nous avons affaire des dangereux amateurs. Or trying this, that, the other, and see what the response will be. But that's not all, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately not. Because then we come to the solidarity tax. Solidarity tax, a hefty solidarity tax, s'il vous plaît. 25% of all leviable income, let's go, just income, above 3 million rupees. That was the announcement in the budget. But worse than that, it was only to tax Mauritian citizens, not foreigners. You would have a foreigner earning the same amount of money as a Mauritian, working next door to a Mauritian in the same room, maybe, in the same floor. He would pay tax at 15%. The Mauritian guy would pay tax at 40%. And the Minister of Finance had thought it absolutely correct. Absolutely correct for that to be the case. Nothing wrong with it. 2 people, depending on the nationality, one would pay 15, the other one would pay 40. He didn't explain what would happen with people with dual nationalities, whether it would be split in half. That was, Mr. Speaker, another unthinkable measure for a Minister of Finance. And of course, it has been dropped. The Minister of Finance has backpedaled, rightly so, I congratulate him again. And now, foreigners and Mauritian citizens will pay, for the same amount of revenue, the same amount of tax. That is obviously something welcome, but how can one even dream of trying to do the opposite? taxing Mauritians much, much more than foreigners for the same amount of income. And so now, Mr. Speaker, also came obviously the announcement that the solidarity tax would be an amount of 25% on all this income above 3 million rupees. And again, there was a lot of public outcry because it was a huge amount of additional tax for people to pay. And obviously, especially when you understand of the gaspillage that this government is actually perpetrating day in, day out. And so now, again, backpedaling, 25% has been capped at 10%. And so here, the solidarity tax has been changed for foreigners, and for the actual amount, the percentage, now capped at 10% instead of the original 25%. So you have, on two of the first measures, dramatic change of course, dramatic backpedaling, welcome backpedaling, I must say, by the Minister of Finance. Now, of course, whilst trying to provide some change, some relief by taxing at 10%, the unfortunate unintended consequence of capping at 10% is that people who earn between 3 million rupees and 5 million rupees will see their marginal tax rate increase to 40%. That is, once you earn over 3 million rupees, every 100 rupee that you earn, the Minister of Finance will take 40 rupees out of that. And then, because of the capping, after the 5 million rupees, that marginal tax rate falls back to what it should be. That is an enormous amount of tax to take from people earning from 3 to 5 million rupees. That is an amount, and that is the case. That is the case. Between 3 and 5 million rupees, I agree they are relatively rich people, but still, you have taxed them at 40%. That was not the original intention. That happened when the Minister of Finance backpedaled with the capping at 10%. But, Mr. Speaker, now we come to the... I'd like to also ask here a very serious question to the Minister of Finance. He had in his budget speech stated that the solidarity tax will bring in 3.5 billion rupees. Is that so? That is correct. 3.5 billion rupees annually to the consolidated fund. He hasn't said with his changes how much money is expected now to accrue to the consolidated fund with his changes. I would perhaps ask him to enlighten the House later on when he speaks to tell us what is the expected revenue that is now going to accrue, to arise with the changes, the capping, etc., also with the taxing of foreigners. That will be bringing positively. Perhaps he can tell us how much money is now expected so that we can compare next year to see how much actually was received, Mr. Speaker. So now let's come to the famous contribution sociale généralisée. That is, Mr. Speaker, a tax that is masquerading as a pension contribution. It has nothing to do with pensions. This is, Mr. Speaker, should not come in the Pensions Act, but should be in the Income Tax Act. It is managed. It is under the Minister of Finance. It is managed by the Director General of the MRA, not by the National Pension, by the Social Security, as the pensions are. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the whole of the amount accrues, if you want, goes to the consolidated fund, which is not what the National Pension Fund did previously. It was accruing, accumulating in each taxpayer's, if you want, individual account. Now this goes to the consolidated fund. It is a tax, pure and simple tax. Now, Mr. Speaker, I cannot vote for this clause in this bill because it is so vague. It is so vague. Every single part of the Act says, as will be prescribed. Everything is as will be prescribed. I'm trying to find it, if I can, quickly. As will be prescribed. The rate of CSG, as may be prescribed. The application of the CSG, as may be prescribed. Any penalty as may be prescribed. This is, Mr. Speaker, sir, an as may be prescribed law. And this is not acceptable. We need to know, he said in his budget speech, it would be 1.5% and 3% for people earning up to 50,000 rupees and double from then on, with no limit. Is that still what is being expected? Or, Mr. Speaker, has he taken advice from the actuaries? And the actuaries have actually said, first time I see that professional advisors have spoken like this concerning a government, that the actuaries have said what is being proposed is a Ponzi-like scheme. So the Minister of Finance is proposing a Ponzi-like scheme to this country as far as the contribution sociale généralisée is concerned. As I said, we need to know before we vote this law, not as may be prescribed, but what is the rate, what is the applicability of this new tax, because it is a tax and nothing else. It has nothing to do in the Pensions Act, it should be in the Income Tax Act. There's no difference between this tax and any other tax. Money is fungible, it goes to the consolidated fund, full stop. So, Mr. Speaker, there's something else also. What is the applicability? To who will this tax apply? This is also extremely important. The Constitution does allow discrimination in taxation, but not this kind of unfair discrimination, where you would have people working in the public sector earning the same amount, or maybe much more, than persons in the private sector, and the person in the private sector, if it's an owner-managed business, for instance, would pay 9% totally, and the guy from the public sector would not pay a cent, but the money would be used for both. One day they'll tell us, Mr. Speaker, that if you voted MSM, you'll pay 3%. If you vote for the opposition, it will be 9%. You cannot be discriminatory in this way. You cannot be discriminatory in this way, and I think it is illegal, the way that this Ponzi-like scheme will be taxed upon, it will be forced upon the private sector employees in Mauritius, Mr. Speaker, sir. So we finish on that cause, Mr. Speaker, to say that we are no longer a low-tax jurisdiction. 15% corporate tax or income tax, 25% solidarity tax, one way or the other, 9% CSG. This is not a low-tax jurisdiction. So I think in one way, the European Union will be happy, because we have now become a high-tax jurisdiction. And this is, Mr. Speaker, important to do that. And lastly on that point, Mr. Chair, I'll say this. With the huge amount of money being taken from the Bank of Mauritius, 158 billion rupees, there was no need to increase taxation, because a lot, I will swear, I will bet my bottom dollar on this, or bottom rupee on this, there will be billions and billions of rupees left in the coffers of this government at the end of this financial year. We'll never spend that much. 10 billion rupees being given to Africa. Why? So, Mr. Speaker, sir, not forgetting the 12 billion in the special funds. So there's a huge, many billions of rupees being allocated, available to government. Most of it would not be spent, a lot of it would not be spent, and there was no reason to increase taxation, maybe perhaps for some dogma that we have not yet understood fully in the opposition. Mr. Speaker, opening to the world, clause 27 and 45. We're lowering the investment threshold for permanent residence scheme. I set the first threshold in 1999 for people retiring in Mauritius at $500,000. 1999. Now, 21 years later, we're not increasing it. We are reducing it to $375,000 US. Small-scale investors as well will have to pay only $50,000 as an investment. Retirees, from last year's budget, they will only have to bring in 60,000 rupees a month. So we are lowering the threshold completely. There are two ways to look at that, but we can look at that. But let's look at it. We are opening to foreigners. We are giving them permission to buy land in smart cities. We are giving them permission to invest in any company once they have an OP, an occupation permit. We'll come to that in a moment. But, Mr. Speaker, here we are opening up to the world. But these provisions do not come with what I think is extremely important for our country, and that is for our electoral laws, and that is a change, a constitutional change, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Constitution of Mauritius, I'm trying to find it. I don't have it, but it doesn't matter. The Constitution of Mauritius, Section 42, says that any Commonwealth national, once he has stayed 2 years in Mauritius, can register as an elector. And in fact, if he's domiciled here, it can be even less. So we are opening up to potentially thousands upon thousands of foreign residents, all of them probably, or many of them probably, from Commonwealth countries. After 2 years only, these people will be allowed to vote in Mauritius if they register. We used to laugh when we were taking Bangladeshis to certain public meetings on the 1st of May. This will no longer be a laughing matter because they are fully entitled to attend these meetings and vote here. And this is the issue, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not particularly choosing, I'm just choosing Bangladeshis because that was in the news. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is it's highly dangerous. And we cannot open up to the world if we do not protect our electoral system. And this Section 42 of our Constitution must be changed to a reasonable number of years, let's say 5 years, 10 years in Mauritius, then you can vote. Not 2 years, Mr. Speaker, sir. Now, I'd like to come to this blanket authorization almost for foreigners to do business in Mauritius. We can do many things. Mauritians love foreigners, but we should never threaten the possibility for a Mauritian to earn a decent living. The foreigner has much more income and investment opportunity than any Mauritian. And it is not a level playing field. I'll take a simple example you will understand. Let's say we have a hairdresser. She only has a million rupees to do a little salon. And next door now comes an American, whoever, French, English. They put 5 million rupees in the hairdressing salon. The Mauritians will never be able to compete. So this is what I'm saying. Every country protects their local citizens. And if you want to attract foreigners, you attract high net worth. You don't attract lower net worth who are going to compete with your SMEs and your Chijibun. And this is exactly what the government is doing. Exactly what the government is doing. They are taxing high net worth for them not to come to Mauritius, whereas lower net worth, up to 3 million rupees, can come to Mauritius, spend $50,000 or 2 million rupees. It's nothing. Even a car is worth that more than that now. And they can do any business they want. And not only that, you come as an IT specialist, you earn 30,000 rupees, and the next day you can work as a taxi driver because you no longer need a work permit. We need to be careful. We need to also carry the population with us in terms of what we are doing for the foreigners, Mr. Speaker. Let's have them, yes, but let's also protect our local citizens. Mr. Speaker, sir, I come quickly to the international sports hub. 5 billion rupees of our money. 1 billion was used from China, which ought to have been spent on the aeronautical school, was in fact diverted to this huge éléphant blanc in Côte d'Or, Mr. Speaker. And now, it is only now that there is the Sports Economic Commission being set up 4 years after the planning for the construction of the stadium, Mr. Speaker. So 4 years after, we have the Sports Economic Commission, and of course, no international event yet. The only thing that the Minister of Sports told us the other day in question time was that j'étais en contact, s'il vous plaît, en contact avec les organisateurs de Nekea Pro Squash. Wasn't even a firm booking. It was merely a contact. This is a huge éléphant blanc. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of rupees in terms of maintenance for the state. And what a shame that we lost this beautiful school where we could have trained pilots, we could have trained stewards, we could have trained aircraft engineers, all financed by the money that has been wasted in the sports hub, so-called international sports hub. Mr. Speaker, coming now to the State Lands Act tourism. The finance bill says no rental will be paid by hotel in respect of period 1st July 2020 to 30th June 2021. This is great news for hotels. But what about the rest? There are something like 115 hotels in Mauritius. There are 187 guest houses. There are 756 tourist residences. Now, these guest houses, yes, they are not the Grand Capital. They are Chijimun, most of them. If they are on the beach, why don't they get also the waiving of the annual rental? If these tourist residences are, and MRA can tell easily, if these tourist residences are in fact rented purely and simply to foreigners, why are these tourist residences also entitled to a waiver of the annual rent, as do big hotels? And this is a question, Mr. Speaker, of unfairness towards Chijimun, a Chi capital, and again it is Grand Capital that is going to enjoy this waiver. It is not right. Because and here we have the new Minister of Tourism. I would like him to put his weight behind all these Chijimun who are going to suffer, because the downturn in tourism is not going to be a short-wave affair. It's going to be a long-term affair. And you need to be fair to give the same treatment to the Grand Capital as you're doing to deserving Chijimun. And that is, Mr. Speaker, very important. Mr. Speaker, on the Workers' Rights Act, here I must say I am totally confused. And I think the explanatory note that has been given is misleading, and that is quite grave, quite serious, Mr. Speaker. Because what I understand the bill to say is that if now you want to make people redundant, it's not something that we wish people to do, but this is what the law says. If you wish to make someone redundant, an employer, this is exactly what the clause says, an employer shall not reduce the number of workers in his employment unless he has applied for financial assistance set up in the institutions listed in the 10th schedule. 10th schedule being MIC, being SIC, and being the DBM. So you will not, an employer being someone who employs more than 15 people. So you will not be allowed, full stop, unless I don't understand English, you will not be allowed full stop to make anyone redundant unless you have applied to these free institutions. Now there's no, you agree, my colleague agrees with me, there is no time limit for them to answer. They are overwhelmed, I'm sure, by applications. They can answer you in a year's time. But until they have refused your financing, you are not allowed to make anyone redundant. This is very unfair. This is very unfair, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because anyway, it would be given as a loan that has to be repaid. Not everyone can bear to take a number of people on, keep a number of people on board for months and months and months in the tourism sector, even if you have a loan that you will repay afterwards. And that is my point. It is for the government to step in to help, say, the tourism industry with the cost of the payroll. And that should continue until, say, the tourism industry is back on its feet again. This is a coercive measure. I don't understand how even it can be legal that you cannot do that, but it is a coercive measure with no safeguards, with no time limit that is being forced upon people. I would ask the government to rethink their policy, as every other country does. I don't know about Peru and whatever, Bolivia, whatever was quoted just now. I'm talking about countries who are leaders in the field. People are encouraging their locals to use facilities, hospitality. Look at the Chancellor of Exchequer did a few days ago, Mr. Speaker. Maybe our Chancellor here, young Chancellor, can take some ideas from that. He reduced VAT on hospitality and restaurant bills from 20% to 5% only to encourage English people to attend. That is also, Mr. Speaker, something that should be done. And I had said that in my budget speech, that we should reduce VAT. We should reduce charges such as electricity. These things must be done. Just trying to coerce people like that will lead to people going bankrupt and will not help the industry. We have 10 billion rupees that we're going to spend in Africa, and we can't find a few 100 million rupees to help people to keep employment in Mauritius. This is, Mr. Speaker, I don't understand how it works, how the thinking works. Two little bits of things, Mr. Speaker. VAT on digital services by foreign suppliers. Now, this can sound like a bit innocuous. The people, Mr. Speaker, in Mauritius are reeling from the additional taxes and the depreciation of the rupee. Now, to watch Netflix, you're going to have to pay 15% VAT on 500 rupees per month. That is what Netflix charges. So this is another tax that is being put on the household. And it is most unwelcome at a time when the government, as I say, has billions to spare. Think, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the Chijimun. That tax on sugar also, at this point in time, with the depreciation of the rupee, has no right to be instated, to be on, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, and also it's very vague. The Medical Council Act. By one stroke of the pen, you could solve the terrible health situation in Mauritius. That is by making sure all the Mauritians who have studied in France, have become great specialists, can actually come back to Mauritius. And they cannot at the moment because, and the Honorable Minister of Health knows this very well because I've spoken to him in his previous calling, that they cannot come because they don't have the same system of internship. Who in the world would dare to say that people trained in France are not up to it? Not the Minister of Finance, I'm sure. Who in the world would say that? Because the French doctors, I don't know about French economists, but the French doctors happen to be the very best in the world. And they cannot even register in Mauritius. They need to register for pre-registration whilst they are in fact specialists. So I will ask the Minister of Health. He knows very well, at one stroke of the pen, he can solve the issue of health, quality of health in Mauritius. Because there are dozens and upon dozens of our young people who have trained in the best universities such as Bordeaux, etc., and who cannot come back to Mauritius because they have to do pre-registration training, which is an insult because these people are actually highly specialized medical practitioners, much more specialized than many people here, and that may be the real reason why they're not being allowed to stay. And Mr. Speaker, I join what the Honorable Leader of the Opposition had said, that there are some, I think, 170 interns who are waiting to have their internship. Let us not get figure. Let us not pick and choose. Let us take first come, first served basis. Those that have been waiting longest, Mr. Speaker, have the right to have the pre-registration training earliest. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, even with these dramatic changes that the Minister of Finance, historically dramatic changes that the Minister of Finance has made to the budget, this is now a tax and spend government. There is no other way than to label this government as a tax and spend government. We are back to the 1970s, Mr. Speaker. The contribution sociale généralisée is too vague to allow anyone to vote for it because it is too vague. There's no certainty at all about the rates, the Ponzi-like scheme, and the applicability as between the public sector and the private sector. In fact, this whole CSG should be abolished. Foreign citizens in Mauritius, Mr. Speaker, sir, with the limits that are being placed, with the opening up, they will threaten the very rights of Mauritians to earn a decent living. This is why when we started in 1999, at the 500,000 USD as minimum investment. That was a Labour PMSD government, by the way. That was setting la barre très haute. Et maintenant, it is nivellement par le bas. And we have to be careful. I'm finishing, Mr. Speaker. I'm finishing. Now, and Mr. Speaker, we do need to have these amendments to the Constitution. Otherwise, in 2 years' time, when we look at some of the meetings for the 1st of May, we'll only see foreigners attending, and God knows for what reason, because they've been bursting from their factories. And Mr. Speaker, the Sports Economic Commission is a little but far too late, and Côte d'Or will remain a disaster for this country. As far as relief for the tourism industry is concerned, it should be more far-reaching, not only for the Grand Capital, but for everyone, and we must look at revenue-generating measures for the tourism industry. That is the only way that will save the 125,000 jobs, representing 24% of GDP. As far as the Workers' Rights Act are concerned, Mr. Speaker, let us not coerce, but provide support to enable endangered companies to continue their employment. This coercion will not work, in my opinion, and will only make matters worse in terms of bankruptcy. Mr. Speaker, that is all I had to say. Thank you very much.